Welcome into the Big Little Podcast, everybody. I'm your host, Patrick Previty. That is Andrew Greig. NFL Week 7 is in the books, as well as college football Week 8. NBA tips off tonight, and the World Series Game 1 is soon after that as well. But first, we're going to talk about NFL Week 7 winners and losers. Andrew, give me your winners. Start positively today.
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm really glad to be back. But on that note, in the positive essence of that, I think quarterbacks coming back, like the quarterback resurgence for just quarterbacks that haven't been had been kind of cast away at some point in their career and are making a comeback. I think that we've seen that with a couple different quarterbacks, namely Sam Darnold last night on Monday Night Football. He looks really good for probably going to like his 1.5 seasons of just looking like a really good football player. 14 wins last season with the Vikings, and then this season unlocking JSN, who looks like he could maybe hit 2,000 yards on the season, and just completely dismantling that Texans team, who is potentially a playoff caliber team in the AFC. We'll see how that pans out. But to a lesser extent, Baker Mayfield, or maybe not to a lesser extent, to the maybe exact same extent, just maybe not last night. Baker Mayfield is also part of that category of quarterbacks that have just seen a complete resurgence since being like dumped by their team, the team that they got drafted by, and shuffled around a little bit in the league. But we've seen this with just a bunch of different quarterbacks that the league's kind of just given up on. And then in the AFC specifically, Daniel Jones, 6-1. The Colts have the best record in the AFC. Just a bunch of teams that are thriving now. And I want to recircle back to the Buccaneers a little bit, even though they did get just destroyed by the Lions yesterday. They're missing so many pieces on offense, and Baker Mayfield is still making something work. He definitely looks like at least a top 10 quarterback in the league. So I attribute that loss less to Baker Mayfield in any respect, more towards the fact that they are just losing people left and right. Mike Evans is going to be out for another couple weeks. So in general, I think that the resurgence of old quarterbacks that were kind of dumped by their old team is a good way to start here. And then moving on into my second winner, the Patriots division hopes, which as a Dolphins fan, it pains me to say that, but the Patriots for the last couple of weeks have had the easiest schedule remaining. I think it's been for like the last 3 weeks now. The average win percentage of the remaining teams that they play is 0.313. So the next 10 teams they play have an average of winning 3 out of 10 games. They play the Jets twice. They play the Dolphins, the Ravens. Obviously the Ravens are a better team with Lamar Jackson, but still the Giants, who are hit and miss on some weeks, the Browns, the Bengals, the Buccaneers, and the Bills. So definitely not a daunting schedule. There's maybe 2-3 losses that you can maybe pencil in there, if that. And besides those, I think that the Patriots have a really good chance at winning the division. They obviously hold the tiebreaker over the Bills right now. If they're able to win the second matchup, I think that they have a really good shot at claiming the AFC East this year.
Yeah, well, we've talked a lot about the schedule for the Bills, but of course the Patriots play in the same division, so they have a very similar schedule. The Patriots are starting to become one of those teams that if you're watching football week to week, you got to take them seriously, and they look like a playoff team in the AFC. I don't know exactly how far I would project them to go, but I know Drake May it feels like the truth, feels like he's the real deal. So I like the Patriots as your winner there. And obviously the Bills were off this week. They get the Panthers next week. So there's going to be a little bit of jockeying for position over the next handful of weeks between those two, and probably towards the rest of the season. And then the QBs restarting their careers. I feel like we have this as a winner almost every single week. There's a ton of different examples of this. It's been like that for years with journeyman quarterbacks, but it just feels like a more prevalent thing now because we in the NFL, maybe as fans and maybe GMs as well, give up on QB so fast, and we want to, draw conclusions as quick as possible. Sometimes you need to have honest assessments when a quarterback is bad, but a lot of these guys kind of got thrown to the wayside, and maybe some for valid reasons. I think mostly, if you look at Sam Darnold's start to his career, or Daniel Jones, it kind of felt valid, but they're in a better situation with a better organization, and it's working. And then obviously you mentioned Baker Mayfield. He's been at it for a handful of years now with the Bucs, and he's looking really good despite that loss to the Lions. My winners this week are the Panthers. This was an easy week to catch up to the Bucs. They had the Lions this week, and the Panthers ended up drawing the New York Jets, who are the absolute worst team in football, in my opinion. And I thought that was really good for their schedule because they didn't exactly play extremely well. Bryce Young was dealing with an injury, and they were still able to pull it out by only scoring 13 points simply because the Jets are really, really bad. And we just talked about the quarterbacks that, had to restart their careers. I don't know how many restarts Justin Fields is going to get, but he's going to be a backup in this league for the time being after this year. And then the Eagles wide receivers. The Eagles kind of let it fly against the Vikings, and I thought that was really good. Devontae Smith had his career high in receiving yards. He had 183. And this Eagles team, it sounds so obvious, but I'm going to just have to say it. If they can pass like this, they can beat anybody in the NFL. They were the defending Super Bowl champions. And through all of the talk about the tush push and them not being able to throw the ball, when they can do it, they're probably better than your favorite team. And I think we saw it against the Vikings this week, even though I will say about the Vikings, just as a point of caution, even though I'm hyping up the Eagles a lot, their situation comes down to the quarterback. And if they don't really have a quarterback that's competent enough, they're going to get bounced in the first round, just is what it is. But the Eagles, very impressed, very happy to see A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith go off.
Yeah, the only pushback I have to that, like not about the last one, I think you concisely made that point about the Eagles wide receivers and just them being a really good football team besides their passing game at times. The Panthers, I just have such little belief in what Bryce Young could be, and obviously he comes out of that game, the Jets are just not competent enough on offense to put up any points, so it didn't really matter. But even when Bryce Young is going to be back at whatever point that is, he's dealing with a high ankle sprain right now. I just don't see him as a franchise quarterback, and we've done this bit about on Bryce Young for a couple of weeks now, and there's nothing that I've seen from him that like leads me to believe that he will be the Carolina Panthers starter in 5 years from now. I think it's unfortunate because he can probably win you just enough games where it's going to look like he's not the problem, and it's just not going to be a point of emphasis to get a new quarterback if he's winning 7 games every year. But I think 9 games is probably the ceiling on Bryce Young. Like, can I see them even relatively competing in that division if the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are healthy, if the Falcons are playing the way they've been playing over the last couple weeks, minus the 49ers game? I think the 49ers are just a really good football team, but I think that the Falcons and the Buccaneers are just significantly better football teams, and that like widely has to do with the fact that I believe in both of those quarterbacks more. Michael Penix less to a lesser extent than Baker Mayfield, but I'm just so low on Bryce Young. And like the wins that they have stacked up, like granted they're on a 3-game winning streak, but 2 of those are to 2 of the worst teams in the NFL, both out of the AFC East, in the Dolphins and the Jets. So I just can't buy into any Bryce Young stock. But I think that you make a really good point with the Eagles wide receivers. If they can play consistently well, then they're contenders for the Super Bowl. Like if Jalen Hurts is on his game and Devontae Smith can get in the action, he had a career game, 180 plus yards. Obviously the first reception that A.J. Brown had immediately went for a touchdown. So if they're playing like the way they did, they can be a Super Bowl contender.
Yeah, I mean, and if you're new here, neither of us are very high on the Panthers or Bryce Young. I guess I kind of more meant the schedule thing, but yeah, we're completely on the same page there with the Panthers. I don't think that they're very good or would be a serious like playoff threat by any means. And I like your 9-game or 9-win max for that team. That feels right. I don't see 10-7 by any stretch of the imagination.
It is unfortunate too, because however well this defense is playing, like J.C. Horn looks like one of the best corners in the NFL. He's had 2 one-handed picks this season. Just that defense in general looks really good. I just don't think that it'll mean that much because I don't see a world where their offense will be competent enough against the best of the best competition to like put up enough points to win them playoff games if we're going that far. So just overall an interesting situation with the Panthers because they don't have a bad roster. I feel like when they originally got Bryce Young, it was to get their franchise quarterback who was supposed to take them to the playoffs consistently. The year before, they'd had like a little push towards the end of the season. They were going to get Bryce Young. It's all going to be fixed, but I just don't think Bryce Young is that guy. So I think that's enough tearing up Bryce Young for one segment.
All right, I'm going to go to my losers. We're switching it around this week. I had the Dolphins as winners last week, but losers this week because I thought that was going to be enough to fire McDaniel. I thought he was going to be gone after one more loss, and I said you're one step closer to blowing it all up. I probably would have bet the house on the last 2 Mondays that he would have been gone by then. But unfortunately, they suffered another loss this week to the Cleveland Browns, 31-6. And we still didn't really see any movement, but we did see Quinn Ewers play a little bit of football. And I'm not high on Quinn Ewers by any means, but something has to change. It's time to blow things up. I know that there's not a quarterback. You're not staring down the barrel of a great QB class, or at least that's what it looks like right now, but it ain't working. And just be careful because the longer you keep this fire going, the more that it ends up becoming like a wildfire that just absolutely burns through the organization. So be very careful. And I think Mike McDaniel will be a great OC wherever he ends up. But it's just not working anymore for the Dolphins. And I thought that they would have blown it up by now. And then the Jets, worst team in the league. I don't think that that's very controversial to say. The Raiders are pretty bad. The Titans are also really bad. They are the one team that has made a decision on their head coach already. But actually, they could be great losers this week, considering that they played the Pats with the whole Mike Vrabel kind of situation going on there, that little angle and storyline. But I chose the Jets just because this looked really bad. It's the same old Jets, and they're the only team with 0 wins in the NFL. So I think it's natural. I'm punching down a little bit here, but Jets and Dolphins as my losers. Honorable mention to the Jags. 4-1 start. We may have gotten a little bit ahead of ourselves. They're now 4-3. That loss really sucked against the Rams. The Rams are for real, and 35-7 wasn't what I wanted to see. But honorable mention to them. This is about the Dolphins and the Jets. Those are my losers.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you at all on either of those points. The Jets are easily the worst team in football. I think that the Dolphins handled them like very handily in the one game that they played. And just in general, Justin Fields isn't a good thrower of the football, and if he's not playing, the Geno Smith isn't all that great either. So I think that it's pretty the case is set on the Jets. They're probably gonna have the number 1 overall draft pick this season. And then the Dolphins, I think that as a Dolphins fan, I've seen a lot throughout the last couple of head coaches. Brian Flores, he got fired after a winning season. Obviously, this is a completely different situation. Mike McDaniel comes in for him, has another winning season, leads us to the playoffs at some point. And then his only losing season was last year, where the last game of the season, we played the Jets. Aaron Rodgers, like homecoming, like his final game as a Jet. He throws the ball all over the yard. Tua Tagovailoa didn't even play in that game. So it was barely a losing season, even in the worst season that he had as Miami Dolphins head coach. But this just completely spiraled after the end of last season. Everything's just gone by the wayside, and unfortunately, Mike McDaniel's offensive genius can't make up for the fact that he's just hasn't been the greatest head coach and like leader of men, if we want to go that far. So, as for my losers, Geno Smith. Man, has it looked bad since week 1. They get a win against the Patriots, and then since then it's just been absolutely atrocious. They're one of the only teams to get shut out this season, and just in general, 10 for 17 or 10 for 16 for 67 yards is just not going to do it in any sense of the imagination. They had no chance against the Chiefs in general, but they just show that there's 2 different, maybe 3 different levels of football in the NFL, and they're very close to the very bottom of whatever levels that there are. So the Raiders look atrocious on offense. Their defense isn't very good. Free Mason Crosby is the only thing I have for the Raiders at that point. Then Baker's MVP chances. I think that Mike Evans being out like significantly impacts just that whole team being injured on offense. Essentially, really impacts his chances. Chris Godwin's hurt. Mike Evans is hurt. Mecca Ibuka is week to week. So just everything going on with the Buccaneers, it felt like this was the year where Baker was having his resurgence, and he still is. But I think the MVP might be a stretch, especially the way Patrick Mahomes is playing with his top 2 receivers coming back, and just other names you want to throw out around the league. I think that Baker's MVP race or MVP chances might have stalled after this week.
Yeah, no argument there on the Raiders and Geno Smith. This has been really, really bad. Somebody check how long Pete Carroll might be there for the Raiders. I'm starting to think that this entire situation for them could also lead to blowing it all up. And yeah, Bucky Irving also out for the Bucs. Really sucks. The 1-score games weren't going to last forever, and they ran into a buzzsaw of the Detroit Lions, and just is what it is. But I'm sure he'll be able to keep them afloat while they end up trying to get healthy. But yeah, the MVP stuff probably going to have to be put on the back burner for now. All right, let's move into college football week 8. Some of the biggest takeaways that we have going into week 9, I have as my first one, as much as people want to say the top of the Big 12 and the ACC are on the same level as the SEC and the Big 10, they're not. Nobody's arguing that the conferences are the same level, from top to bottom. But I think that there's a bit of a feeling, Texas Tech can compete with some of the top teams in the SEC. Or maybe there's Georgia Tech can also compete with, some of the top teams in the SEC or the Big 10. I'm hearing a little bit less Georgia Tech, but I heard a lot of Texas Tech. It's just not true. And maybe, as a college football fan, yeah, sure, I do wish it was true, but that's not the case right now. And I think that was pretty obvious this last week. Georgia Tech pulled away from Duke late. I think that they're totally going to have a loss at some point before the ACC title game. And Texas Tech fell to Arizona State, which there's nobody in this country that's been higher on Arizona State than me. But even I can tell you right now that Texas Tech, if you are one of the top teams in the country, you do not lose that game. And they did. And they've been working with two quarterbacks for a few weeks now. And they've got some decent wins with those two guys. That wasn't why they lost this game. That was just simply outplayed in that matchup. And I feel like that should be noted. Also, I will say Miami is the one team of those two conferences that can compete. And it's going to be a very unpopular opinion since they just lost to Louisville. But I still believe that, although I do have a resurgence of fear with Carson Beck after that performance that he had against Louisville. And then Alabama. I think that they're going to run the table. That is not the same team from week one. And if there's anybody that actually saved or, miraculously turned things around to the 10th degree, it was Kalen DeBoer. And what they have been able to do since that loss to Florida State. Ty Simpson has been amazing. That team is all around a very good football team, and they have 3 straight ranked wins against SEC opponents. And I don't want to hear it about how maybe some of those SEC opponents are overrated, because I'll probably agree with you with Vanderbilt and Missouri. But that game against Tennessee, that was a good win, 37-20. And I'm very high on Alabama. I think that they're one of the better teams in the country. They didn't have that Florida State loss. I wonder how high they'd be. Probably 3, right above Texas A&M in that case. Maybe 4. But I'm very high on Alabama, and I think at this point it looks like they're going to run the table in the regular season. I mean, we'll see how if they look that same way going in the SEC championship game. I don't want to get too ahead of myself. I think it's a very, very good team.
Yeah, I will say, I don't know how many people are still making the case for the Big 12 and the ACC. There are people out there, but I think that a lot of people acknowledge that the SEC and Big 10 are just miles ahead of each of those conferences at this point. Even the top end of those conferences match up with maybe the middle end of like the Big 10 and the SEC at this point. Obviously, there are some standout teams, but even those teams, like you mentioned, Texas Tech gets taken aback this week by Arizona State, who also isn't that good, and those are the 2 top teams who, like, excluding BYU, the Big 12, and then I just can't find any reason to think that the ACC is really for real. I think that Georgia Tech would be 2 touchdown underdogs against any of the other teams in the top 10 right now, and that applies to probably any other team in the ACC not named Miami. So I can't disagree with you on either of those points. And Alabama, just they look like the team that Nick Saban left to Kalen DeBoer. So it's good to see, or it depending on who you ask, but Alabama football is in general good for the state of college football, just because if you hate them, you can hate them more because they're good. If you like them, then it helps that they're also good. So I like those.
I did want to mention, I guess part of my Big 12 ACC take, a couple things. I guess I saw some more propaganda on my social media feeds from people who are really, really praising Texas Tech. And they are very good and much improved. They had the number 1 transfer portal class. How many wins can you buy? But it's just they're not that good. I saw somebody say that they would beat a lot of SEC teams on a neutral site. I'm not buying that. And like I said, I think top of the ACC is pretty fraudulent outside of Miami. It just sucks for them this year. Clemson and SMU came into this year with much higher expectations. SMU's crawling back. Watch out. But Clemson, not it. So just kind of a down year, in my opinion, overall for that conference. So I think that's what I saw. But yeah, let's move into your takeaways.
Yeah, switching back to the SEC, Texas A&M, I know that they only beat Arkansas by 3 points in a game that probably should have been a lot. Like, Arkansas just kept on clawing their way back into that game, but Arkansas has been doing that all season. They only lost by 1 score to Ole Miss. They only lost by 3 points to Tennessee at Tennessee. So they've been a decent team all season. Granted, they do have a 40-point loss against Notre Dame, but they have a loss against Memphis, who has showed this week that they're not anything too special either, but still they only lost by 1 point to Memphis. And just in general, their losses minus Notre Dame haven't looked exceptionally bad. And I think that their record 2-5 probably doesn't sit, like, they're not a 2-5 team. They're better than a 2-5 team, and that shows the last 2 losses only coming by a combined 4 points against Tennessee and Texas A&M, 2 of the top 12 teams in the nation. But switching back to Texas A&M, I genuinely think that this could be a college football championship contender. Like, in a college football landscape that is so wide open at this point. I think that I've seen a lot, maybe not as much from their defense this weekend against Arkansas, but Marcel Reed has come a long way from last season. I remember looking back at last season, and they had a chance to make the SEC championship. In the final game of the season, they played at home against Texas, a game that would have got them into the SEC championship. And they completely fumbled that game, and it was primarily on the offense. The offense just couldn't put a drive together. They couldn't go down the field. They couldn't score on Texas. Granted, that Texas defense had a bunch of NFL draft picks. They were one of the best teams in the nation. But I think that the growth of Marcel Reed as a dual threat quarterback and just a quarterback in general has been great. And they have 2 number 1 receivers in Casey Concepcion, Mario Craver, and even Ashton Bethel Roman got into the action this past week. He had a touchdown, 4 catches for 83 yards. So I think that offense can look really good at times. We have yet to see it against maybe the top defenses in the SEC, but Florida was playing pretty well, but when they played them, and they still put up 30 on them. So I think that this Texas A&M team isn't going to be taken for granted. I think that they have a genuine shot at competing for a national championship. Will they win it all? I won't go that far, but Texas A&M looks really good. And then I wanted to move into Vandy, another SEC team that looks pretty good. I think that just highlighting them after getting a big win against LSU is good for the program. They're the number 10 team in the nation at this point. Granted, they still have some hard games left to play, but I think that what they're doing, in general, has been really good the last 2 seasons. That Alabama loss looks a lot worse than it actually was. The final score ended up being 16 points, but that was a 1-score game for the majority of the time. Then the upcoming games are Mizzou, who I think are pretty fraudulent, and I think that they'll win that game. And then they have Texas. We'll see what Texas is in that game, genuinely. And then Auburn, Kentucky, and then they finish with the Battle of Tennessee, which is Tennessee versus Vanderbilt, number 17 Tennessee at this point, and it'll be at Rocky Top. But if they only get 1 loss the rest of the season, I think that there's a chance that they may make the college football playoff, which is like more than you could have expected coming into the season.
Yeah, I definitely think that with their schedule, like it does line up to where they could put themselves in there. I just am a little bit like they got to get through Mizzou, and Mizzou's got to get through them too. And then I see Texas and Tennessee, and I'm thinking that might be a loss among those. But we'll wait and see. I'm not extremely high on Vanderbilt, but like it looks like they can definitely make the college football playoff. Like that is not without, that's in the realm of possibility.
Yeah, I think that the 1 loss point that I was trying to make, I probably should have articulated that a little bit better. I think that if they're able to go into Texas or into Tennessee and beat either of those teams, I think that if they run the table besides those games and are 4-1, including the loss to either of them, I think that that gets them into the college football playoff, just because how tough it is to play at Texas, how hard it is to play at Rocky Top. If they're able to go into those places, they're both on the road. They're able to go in. Diego Pavia is able to have an extremely good showing. They're able to get one of those wins and then win against Missouri, Auburn, and Kentucky. I think they're a college football playoff team with only 1 loss, which would be 2 losses, which would be to Alabama at Alabama, and either at Texas, or at Tennessee, at Tennessee.
Texas A&M, your point about them, I think they're a really interesting team, just considering that they're an undefeated SEC team this late in the year, and their best win is against Notre Dame. And I respect Notre Dame. That's not a shot at Notre Dame, but I just found that to be a little bit of an interesting tidbit because they played Auburn, Mississippi State, Florida, Arkansas, and I think all these teams are pretty good. And you mentioned, like, obviously the game against Arkansas, it was more about the offense, and you got to clean some stuff up. But I find I'm going to maybe potentially need to see more as them being the national championship contender, but it is so wide open. I can pick apart any team at the very top here and probably say the same thing, where I'm like, oh, the schedule doesn't look all that good, but we're going to figure it out in a couple weeks. Like, I mean, yeah, that's just how it is in college football. It's heating up right now. Outside of the week before rivalry week in the SEC, everybody's playing somebody for the rest of the way. So there you have that. The Texas game will be very exciting. They got Missouri, and then I don't know what to think about LSU, to be honest with you, but they have them coming up, and we're gonna know more, I guess. Let's move into Billy Napier. He was finally officially fired, let go of his head coaching duties at Florida. What are we thinking about that? He didn't save his job. He wasn't able to create a big enough turnaround. As far as the program is concerned for Florida, right move. Where do we see him going after this?
I think this is an interesting move from the program, especially firing a head coach after a win. I understand that win wasn't even relatively pretty, and they had to eke it out against Mississippi State. But I think that Mississippi State isn't even that bad of a football team. And if you're going to do this, I don't know that this was the exact right moment. Is there ever a right moment to fire your head coach? But yeah, in the middle of the season, I feel like this just guarantees that like you lose a lot of people because like doesn't the 30-day transfer window open after a head coach is fired? And then also DJ Lagway, I don't see a world in which he is not in that transfer portal. Maybe not this season, but going into the end of the fall when the transfer portal period ends, I think that they probably lose him, and this team just goes into a full rebuild, which is kind of the case with they were kind of trying to do an informal rebuild where they do it with their head coach, but they just lose him at the end of the season. I liked what he did at the end of last season, but it just felt like this season wasn't going really anywhere. And they have some competitive games. They have a win against Texas, but I don't know. I think that this is probably the right decision. Just interesting timing because we've kind of been calling for it for a little bit here, and I don't disagree with the actual concept of Billy Napier getting fired. Just I don't know that I was fully expecting it after this week, but a lot of people were, because there were a lot of people that were calling for it before the game. There were a lot of people calling for it during the game. The Florida fans were chanting "Fire Billy" even when they were down in that Mississippi State game. So I think that it's the right decision. Just interesting timing is my whole take on the situation.
I think that they needed some time, which sounds ridiculous because he feels like he's been on the hot seat for like 2 years now. But I think that they needed some time after the Texas A&M loss to make sure that they had all of their ducks in a row and they weren't going to fire him, in the middle of the week before Mississippi State. So I think that they had an idea that they were going to fire him regardless. And obviously it wasn't a pretty win. So at the very least, they could get away with it. And nobody's going to remember that you fired him after a win anyway in the long run. The 30-day transfer portal thing is really interesting because they changed that rule mid-season. So the 30-day transfer window doesn't start till Florida hires a new head coach. There were some teams that were grandfathered in to the old rule like UCLA, but actually I did read something about that, and none of the UCLA players hopped in the portal. And I think that's a really good sign to what they're doing with that program, because that has been an insane turnaround. But so at the very least, Florida doesn't have that. And DJ Lagway, he might stay a Gator. We'll see who they end up going to. They're going to be competing with Penn State for probably the top dog in college football, or the top coach that wants to leave and go somewhere. So they'll shell out a ton of money. I'm sure Florida fans root against Ole Miss and Nebraska, root for those teams to fall apart. So then maybe it's more likely that their individual coaches, Matt Rule and Lane Kiffin, end up going to a different school. I think that that's probably their best case scenario for sure by a mile. And, not bad. I don't disagree with the move whatsoever. I think it was time. It was the right deal. And Mike Norvell is definitely next.
I can understand the Lane Kiffin perspective of this, but I don't know that Matt Rule is a significantly better coach than Billy Napier. Like I mean, he definitely could be, but that Nebraska program it's in a good spot, and I think that Dylan Raiola is decent, even though that they're coming off a loss. I don't know that Matt Rule is like miles above, especially when it comes to recruiting. It felt like Billy Napier had like at least a decent handle on that. They had some pretty good recruits, namely DJ Lagway. Verno, like Brown is their best receiver right now, the current true freshman. So I don't know. I feel like there's also a look into what you can get. And I don't know that landscape is particularly bright, right? Lane Kiffin is definitely that name that if he was going to make a jump, Florida, even in the SEC, is I feel like another step above Ole Miss if he's going to continue going in the upwards trajectory. But I think that it's always good to keep the perspective of who you can get. And I just don't know, especially with the perspective of when we were talking about Penn State, we kind of mentioned that, is it like if what was out there was Manny Diaz, was like that really going to be a good hire for them relative to the fact that they're losing James Franklin? I think that Florida's in a pretty similar situation where I guess you need somebody to just do a full reset on the program and kind of come in and set a new culture. But are any of these coaches significantly better than Billy Napier? I'm struggling to pinpoint one that I'm really looking at, especially with Kurt Cignetti getting that new contract extension, and a lot of the other coaches kind of just looking like they're going to stay put where they are. I don't see that name right now that really sticks out as significantly better. But it was also just time for that program for a while. They've been chanting "Fire Billy" for like 2 years now. So I understand.
Yeah, I don't. And Marcus Freeman's a name that I've seen thrown around. I don't think he's leaving for either of those jobs. Notre Dame is a great job to have. It just so happened that Brian Kelly kind of, he didn't like wear out his welcome or anything, but he chose to leave and he wanted to go to LSU. It is what it is. You see how that turned out for him. I don't think Marcus Freeman's making that decision anytime soon. And with the way that program has kind of changed culturally under him, I don't see it. Maybe Golish from USF. It just depends on what you want. It's been so long almost, it feels like now, for Matt Rule, pre-Nebraska and Panthers era. Some not you, but some people maybe forget, how down in the dumps Temple was, and he brought them back in the mid 2010s. And then Baylor had their whole scandal and everything that happened. He took over and they ended up getting, I believe, like 11 wins in one of the years. Like he's a really good guy who could turn around the program. And then maybe we just haven't seen him at like the absolute highest level in college football. Like, is he going to be in a position where he ends up like James Franklin, where he turns the program around but can't win the big game? I don't know. Just simply throwing that out there because I guess we haven't really seen him at a program with that many resources. I know Nebraska's got plenty, but I feel like they've been down for so long. I would probably give the edge to other schools like Florida and Penn State. It's weird because I had no idea that Matt Rule played at Penn State, so I feel like Penn State would be the more logical decision among those. And that's where Florida, I think, gets caught a little bit, because it's like, if you go out here, big game hunting, Penn State could get that guy and you could end up being left with whatever else is out there. And I think that you still could have a lot. But yeah, Cignetti, it was the no-brainer decision. I mean, you were obviously going to give him a pay raise, but Cignetti would have been a guy you throw however much money that you possibly can at and try to get him. And that's just the way that it is. Lane Kiffin, I really honestly do see him staying at Ole Miss if they have a great year. But if it falls apart towards the end of the year, I think anything's open with Lane Kiffin.
Yeah, I think that Alex Golish is a really interesting name to throw out there, just because he could be in the mix for that job. But I think that just in the state of Florida football, USF is kind of looked at as like in the second tier with like UCF, maybe like to a lesser extent FAU, and like the teams either in the group of five or newly into the conference like the Big 12 and UCF. I don't know. I just feel like that'd be it just feels like that would be a step down. I understand that USF is having a good season. Alex Golish is leading the charge on that, former offense coordinator at Tennessee, and before that UCF too. So like he has experience in the college football level, but I don't know. It's just like from the factor of like being in Florida and understanding like how big of a job Florida is, like University of Florida is, and being in the SEC, like just going from a group of five school in USF and making that big of a jump to UF, it feels like a little bit drastic for that name to be floated around there, and it just feels like that just be a step down for the program that is Florida, having to resort to USF's head coach. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I can see that perspective. I just think I looked at it the other way though, more in like the half glass full kind of perspective, where I'm like, oh well, he's got Florida recruits, he's got the pulse on the state a little bit there. And USF, I was thinking about this the other day. I was like, dude, when USF is good, it almost feels like there's more national attention than when UCF is good. Like I maybe I'm forgetting, I know UCF got a ton of national attention in 2017, 2018, but when USF is good, I feel like a lot of people, like older college football fans, recognize that Bulls brand a little bit more because of what they were able to do in the mid 2000s. And they've been around a little bit longer than UCF, but now obviously UCF's in Big 12. So it's like a little bit less of a point. But I feel like the culture and what they have at USF is like more nationally appealing. So I don't think that they would go that way or see it as a step down. But like I said, they're going for those other names first. I think that they want to go almost as safe as possible. I don't know if James Franklin, I can't believe we went this long talking about the Florida opening. I'm just throwing it out there.
Yeah.
If there's a guy that you want to try to stabilize the program, he did it for Vandy and he did it for Penn State. I know Bill O'Brien was like the main guy there at, the post-Paterno era, but like, he did it at Penn State as well, and he's never been bad anywhere that he's went. Maybe that's where you want to go, because right now you're not winning the big games. You're so far away, you're not winning the little games. So get James Franklin in there to win you those gimmies, and then maybe you go from there. Or also too, who's to say he's just gonna like also wherever he goes never be able to win the big game for the rest of his life? I don't know. I feel like that's like a little bit overstated with the next place that he goes to, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think the only issue with James Franklin, right, is you get a Billy Napier who at least beats at least beats Texas this year, which could be considered a pretty big game, especially at Florida for just for the program in general. I I just feel like the stigma around James Franklin is if he was the Florida head coach at the time that they played Texas, I don't know that they win that game. And just just going from like storylines and perspectives, I think that Billy Napier maybe it just in the look of a lot of people's eyes probably gives you a better chance than James Franklin to win any of those really big SEC matchups. And it feels like with the brand that Florida is, all of those games are going to be big matchups. Like it's not like and it's every game in the SEC feels like a big matchup, but like the games that they're playing this year, LSU, Texas, Miami, Texas A&M, all of those, like I don't know how many wins you're chalking up to James Franklin's coaching. So I think that's maybe why we don't like throw that name around, because every game in the SEC is essentially a big game, and we know James Franklin's track record with big games.
All right. Well, the most miraculous comeback happened this week in the NFL, and we didn't include them in our winners and losers segment because we were going to get to it now. The Broncos scored 33 points in the fourth quarter to beat the New York Giants 33-32. What an insane win. What an insane game that this was. Give me your kind of like first thoughts. I know you had a fair amount on this.
Yeah, so I just think that I thought I saw it all with the Tennessee Arizona game earlier this season with an interception that gets overturned and then it's just a touchdown because of a fumble. I thought that game was the craziest ending, but by far it was this Giants Broncos game. 33 points in the fourth quarter. I don't have the stats in front of me, but that's got to be one of the only times that that's ever happened. And for them to just be going back and forth towards the end of that game, the Giants go down the field, drive it down all the way for the touchdown. Kind of Jackson darts. Like it's one of those moments where you look back for a rookie quarterback and look and say maybe he's possibly the guy for that team. And it's just completely spoiled by a Broncos offense that was absolutely atrocious for the first three quarters of that football game. They had sparks at moments, but man, where they couldn't put up anything, right? And then it just completely there's a flip that's switched in that fourth quarter, and it just like Bo Nix turns into to prime Bo Nix. We saw a flash of this last season, and it all came back together in the fourth quarter. And it just also didn't help that Jackson Dart obviously had that drive towards the end of the fourth quarter, like the very end of it. But before that, it was like they couldn't put anything together on offense. They had a couple drives where they were just going 3-and-out, and then it let the Broncos come back into that game. And when you're telling me that they did the majority of this comeback within the last 5 minutes, it's absolutely absurd though. And for their kicker to miss 2 extra points and then to have that cost them the game was just in general kind of Giants football, which is really unfortunate for the Giants.
And the Giants have something good going here. So I'll say the first thing on the Giants, I guess. You like the quarterback running back duo. You're thinking that they're about to get a great win against the Broncos, and it just implodes. But it's a good thing that they're not really, or at least the quarterback and a lot of this team isn't going to be graded on this year. Maybe Brian Daboll will be, but like the actual players for this Giants team aren't. And it's good with what we're seeing from them, but you really hate to have this game slip away. But they're competitive now, and they were left dead after the first handful of weeks with Russell Wilson. So still positive, but you don't want to give this away. Now, you said you didn't have the stats in front of you. Yeah, the Broncos had the second most points scored in a fourth quarter, which is actually insane. I would not have guessed 33 points would have been second, but behind a 34-point performance by Detroit. 37-27 win over Chicago, 2007. But it was the most points by any team that was shut out in the first three quarters. And I think that there's something to be said with flipping the switch for this Broncos team. And that was really good to see. Now, the first three quarters cannot happen again against any team that would potentially not implode like the Giants. And I think that almost goes without saying, but I said it anyway. And I think it's something to watch, just making sure that I know Sean Payton got a lot of flack after this game for the first three quarters. As long as him and Bo Nix are on the same page and this offense is rolling more consistently, this Broncos team is a very good football team because the Chiefs are right on their tail. So it was good that they got this win. Chargers are slumping a little bit, but it looks like it's going to be between the Broncos and the Chiefs for this division. And this was a very important win. And I think we're more like in awe of the fact that they were able to get this win, but just from a standings perspective, very good, very positive for the Broncos.
Agreed. I think that you make a really good point. With the standings perspective, I think that it is probably the race between the Chiefs and the Broncos. And this, like you mentioned, it puts them in first place in the division. They're 5-2. The rest of the competitive teams are 4-3 in the Chargers and the Chiefs. And this is a game that you really want to get because of the fact that the Giants just aren't all the way. They're not all the way there yet, right? So you don't want to be losing games you can win, especially at home. You only get so many of them. So yeah, I think that for the AFC West chances this season, the Broncos need something like this. And this probably should have been not a gimme, but they should have won this game. And they were, you know what, good teams. It doesn't matter how they win; they get it done. I feel like that was the critique on Kansas City a lot last year. They're finding ways to win games. They won 15 football games last season, and could have been 16 if they played that last game. And everybody was like, "Oh, the way they're doing it." They still made the Super Bowl. Granted, they didn't win the Super Bowl, but it's not about how you win; it's about if you get the win. And sometimes it's about how you win. But in this perspective, it's about if you got the win or not, and they did. So congrats to the Broncos, and just an absolutely insane game. And unfortunately for Jackson Dart too, that fourth quarter was like, besides that last drive, was also one to forget. I said the 3-and-outs thing, that was toward the second to last drive they had, but he also had an interception right before that on a drive that they couldn't really get started. So just, it sucks to lose a game like that, right? Like he was like essentially like heartbroken. I think one of the Broncos linebackers came up to him at the end of the game and kind of just like tried to like pick him back up. He was like, I know it's a tough loss, but yeah, it's probably one of the toughest losses we've ever seen in NFL history. So
moving into the last topic of the day now, Miami fell to Louisville 24-21. Carson Beck threw 4 interceptions, shades of what he was at Georgia through stretches last year. Let's just talk about this game first before we get into the situation that Miami is in the ACC.
yeah, I think that this game is representative of what Miami can look like at their lowest, which is still pretty darn good at football. I think that Louisville is still one of the more competitive teams in the ACC. They only have one loss, which is to Virginia, who is one of the top teams in the ACC at this point. And even so, like Carson Beck turns the ball over 4 times, right? You'd think that Miami would lose by double digits at the very least. They lost by 3 points in a game that was very much winnable until the very last drive of the game. So I think that that's encouraging from Miami perspective. But what you saw, like if you just are very concise about it and talk about like what was on the football field on that given Saturday or given Friday, that it just didn't look very good. It felt like Louisville had a control of that game for big stretches of it, which makes sense because if your quarterback's turning the ball over 4 times, it's gonna look like that, right? But I think that the defense played good enough to keep them in that game against a Louisville offense that has shown shades of being good this season. And in general, that like I mentioned, that Louisville football team is a good football team. So I think that for the Miami Hurricanes, this is definitely like come back to reality moment. Everybody was tooting their horn. Everyone was saying that they look like maybe reading their press clippings a little bit is like the old saying for it, where like everybody's telling them that they should be getting #1 overall votes, that they had one of the hardest schedules in the country leading up to this, that they could run the table, that they could win the ACC, and this just brings you back to reality, right? The ACC, although it's still miles away from the Big Ten and the SEC, it's still a decent conference, and teams like Louisville can beat you on any given Friday, Saturday, whatever day they play on. So I think that Carson Beck needs to take a hard look in the mirror after this one and assess whatever went on in that game. I think the worst part of that wasn't even throwing the interceptions and losing that football game. I think the worst part of it was the fact that they were not like, just the assessment of blame towards the end of it was very poor. I thought, like, even if your wide receiver did run the wrong route at the end of that game, you don't go out into the media. I feel like that's a Tua Tagovailoa, like telling the media the week before that people weren't showing up to, or week after, that people weren't showing up to the players only meetings and everything was just kind of going wrong internally. You don't throw your wide receiver under the bus and say that he ran the wrong route. It's a high pressure situation, and you had already thrown 3 picks to that game. So I think the question was something along the lines like what happened on that last play, and then he was like, well, the receiver ran the wrong route. You just can't do that. I feel like that's a maturity thing, and that's also like a humbleness thing. It just from start to finish in that game, I was just a little bit disappointed with Carson Beck's play, which is probably the first time I can say that this season.
Yeah, I think you're right about this floor thing with Miami. This sounds ridiculous to even say, I guess now after this game, but prior to it, I honestly thought Shannon Dawson, quarterback whisperer, OC, we've got weapons all over the place now. I mean, this wide receiver room completely overhauled. The running backs are decent. And I'm thinking we have enough tools to the point where Carson Beck over 30 plus games started. This shouldn't happen. And it did. And for that to actually see this in a Miami uniform, I think did take me aback a little bit. And I was like, okay, that's the floor for this team. It's still a good team because Louisville is still a good team. But that is something that cannot happen under any circumstances again this year. And it can't happen against any team if this team makes the college football playoff, because that will immediately end their season. So I think that that's something to recognize. A couple things, though, too. The defense was good after the first quarter. They were able to weather the storm. I don't blame the defense for how they played in this game. After the first quarter, I think they gave up 10 total points for the rest of the way. There was something there. Louisville was trying everything, and a lot of it worked. But still, at the end of the day, the Miami defense I thought played well. Would have liked to see down the stretch Heisman candidate Ruben Bain, maybe get a sack or something. I would have liked to just see a play where it's just undeniable. Yes, they were able to get a stop whenever they needed to. Miami had a chance to win this game though, so I don't blame them, but I would have just liked to see Ruben Bain, Keem Nesdor, somebody on the defensive side of the ball just make a play where that's how they escape. I thought that also could have been a route for them. The running game, a little bit it's not exactly inspiring right now. I'm not going to get too much into the exact play calls, but I just feel like the way that they're running the ball could be a lot better with who they have. And then as far as the receivers go, we're not seeing any of JoJo Trader. Everybody's asking where he's at right now. That is also a question that I have. Maybe it's something to go on with practice, but right now the receivers are good enough, so it still just falls on Carson Beck. Before we get into the ACC situation that this team is now in, which is a really, really bad spot, but oddly still hopeful situation that I think that they're in, I did want to talk about the post-game stuff. I agree with you, but I will say some of the social media roundups are a little bit misleading. There was a lot of people who said he threw his teammate under the bus, and then there was a lot of people who was watch the full clip in context. I still think that you don't say that your tight end ran the route wrong in the press conference, but I kind of understand if he was asked for 25 minutes, or however long the press con. It wasn't 25, but you know what I'm trying to say. If he's asked 10 times, you got to give the same answer 10 times. There was a miscommunication that was confirmed by the other coaches that there was obviously something that was wrong on that play, but he still threw the pick. He could have thrown it away. It's still on him. And if you're asked 10 times, you answer it the same way 10 times, you don't want to switch it up on that 10th time. And you're getting paid $4 million in NIL. You're the highest paid player in college football this year. You've got enough to your name to the point where you go up there and you defend or you take the blame, and you don't throw it on Elijah Lofton, who is in his first year starting at tight end for this team. But there's a little bit of context there that I think should be acknowledged. But even with that, still on Carson Beck, not a good position. But right now, they do not control their own destiny in the ACC. Curious as your thoughts as far as their chances of making the ACC title game.
I think the odds that they make the ACC championship game are still pretty high. I think that if Miami wasn't going to run the table, I don't think that any of the rest of the ACC teams have a chance at doing it either. Granted, this isn't running. Some of them isn't running the table as a whole, like Virginia wouldn't be. It would just be winning all of their ACC games. Off that NC State, when we talked about it off air, is just so confusing that's not just an ACC game. But that's taken them off the hook a little bit. But I think that there's an opening for Miami to get in here. I don't think that any of these teams look to be particularly strong, going from Georgia Tech to Louisville to any of the rest of the teams to Virginia, to any of the rest of the teams in the conference. I think that the path is still pretty straightforward. If they win, they're in. And at the very least, the ACC championship game isn't what Miami's competing for at this point. Before this game happened, you would have said that Miami is one of, if not the best team in the nation from top to bottom. So I think that's still the case, and they're competing for a national championship this year. So even if they don't make the ACC championship game, if they win out and are somehow not able to make it to the ACC championship game, they'll be in the playoff. They're not going to drop from 9 if they keep on winning. So I think that is like the least of their concerns, but it would be nice, right? Like as a Miami football fan, like we haven't finished in the top 10 for a decade, so a decade plus. So it would be nice to have that. And we haven't won the ACC championship game since we joined the conference, and we haven't won in general since we joined the conference in 2003. So I getting that ACC championship game would be just a lift for the whole program, especially because if Carson Beck does play the way that he played in this game, this isn't going to be a national championship winning team, and he's going to have to not play this way for 3 straight rounds against some of the best competition in all of college football. Can he do that? Sure. Will he do that? Still undetermined. So if nothing else, leaving this season with an ACC championship win after last season having such high hopes for it, and in seasons past not being able to achieve that goal either with very good Miami teams, it would just be a lift for the program in general, especially if they're not going to win the national championship.
So the ACC situation is really interesting to me because obviously, like I mentioned, and as you just talked about, they don't control their own destiny, but it still seems like there's a very good chance that they still make it. They have to do their part. They have to win out. They got Boston College, Virginia Tech, Cal, Clemson, SMU, and Kentucky. Those are winnable games. SMU is crawling back up. Pitt is decent, but SMU is like the real, or excuse me, I just read off Louisville's schedule. They have Miami's got SMU, Stanford, Syracuse, NC State, Virginia Tech, Pitt. The point I was going to make with Louisville's schedule up was that SMU is huge. If Miami can beat SMU, win out, what they need is for SMU to go beat Louisville. They can maybe rely on Pitt. I don't know how good they are, or Cal, but like those are some teams that I think could potentially help them out. Then what do they need from Georgia Tech and Virginia? We mentioned that Virginia and NC State was a non-conference game, and that's a total bailout for Virginia this year. They just kind of got luck of the draw there. But they need a loss from or multiple losses, I guess, from one of those teams. And I honestly do think that is pretty possible. I'm specifically from Virginia. I think Georgia Tech is going to have a loss, and I don't think it's just going to be Georgia. And I know that's an out-of-conference game, but I do think that Georgia Tech is going to suffer a loss, but it's not going to be enough if Georgia Tech and Virginia both have one loss. You'd have to go to tiebreakers, and at that point, it's just a toss-up. Like, who knows exactly what that's going to look like until the final week of the year. But I do think that you can rely on potentially Virginia losing again or twice. That I think is really, really huge. And I'm looking at that, and I'm thinking, I think that's very possible. I think that Miami still, even with that being said, has a better shot at making the college football playoff than they do of making the ACC title game. Because at the very least, I think what is definitely going to happen is that Miami's going to win the rest of their schedule. Syracuse without Steve Angeli has been a terrible team, unfortunately for them. Stanford put together some good wins. They're not really there yet this year. SMU is playing well, but I like Miami over SMU. And then same with NC State, Virginia Tech, and Pitt. I think they're all pretty decent teams. Virginia Tech kind of turned their year around a little bit, suffered a couple straight losses, but decent squads, respect them. But I got Miami. It's a weird position, but I think we're going to see them make the ACC title game, but 11-1 non-conference championship participant does make the college football playoff, in my opinion, for Miami.
Yeah, I think that looking at these schedules a little bit more, it starts to get a little bit dicey because Virginia only has 5 games left on their schedule. UNC, that just looked like a bad football team since that first drive of the season. Cal, Wake Forest, Duke, and Virginia Tech, you'd have to find 2 losses in there. Duke probably with their transfer class and the way they're playing. I just like Manny Diaz, maybe not as my head coach, but in general, I like what he's done with Duke. So could they find the loss there? Sure. But
I think so. They have great QB play. It does suck that they don't draw SMU, but like still.
Yeah. And it's at Duke. It's in Durham too, so that also helps. And Wake Forest played Georgia Tech to overtime. So could they find a loss there too? Sure. But Cal, UNC, and Virginia Tech, I'm definitely not high on. UNC and Virginia Tech are 2 of the worst teams in all of the Power 4. So it's going to have to come from one of those 3 games in the middle between Cal, Wake Forest, and Duke, and probably going to take 2 losses. So we'll see how that actually shakes out. And then Georgia Tech is. I don't know that I can find 2 losses on their schedule too. So looking at the reality of it, it looks a little bit bleaker than I realized. But I think that there's still a chance. It's just Miami at the very base level of this, Miami has to win out, which I think is something that had to be preached last year as well. And it didn't really work out in their favor. So we'll see how the season goes. And as I'm walking myself through this, I get continually pessimistic just because of what I've seen from Miami over the years. But that Georgia Tech loss last year should have been what really opened our eyes to can't lose again. Like if you're not making the ACC championship game, that Syracuse game of the last game of the season was absolutely heartbreaking. So we'll see exactly how it shakes out, but
I think that those teams at the top, we're just comparing like who's the best team on their schedule. I think they're going to lose a game against a middling ACC team. Like I could buy that too. Like I think that that's just it's what has to happen for Miami. But I think it's very possible. It's college football. Everybody, welcome to the sport. Like Louisville is a good team, and they've had some good games this year. But welcome to college football. Like it happens. These teams week to week, nothing is guaranteed. In the same breath as it's almost like the NFL. Not completely, but still, it's football. And these things happen. And I think one of those teams will be able to rise to the occasion in whatever way. I'm not high on Georgia Tech, but I don't think that is the path for them. I think it has to be through Virginia. And I honestly think it does happen. But if it doesn't, they still make the college football playoff. And there should be no scenario where if they're 11-1 non-conference champion, that they don't get in over 10-2 Notre Dame. And that is also something that I think needs to be recognized, because there were 10 AP voters. I know they're not the college football playoff committee, but there are 10 AP voters that put Notre Dame ahead of Miami this week already. And Miami's got, in my opinion, better resume, better wins, and they have one less loss. So I thought that was pretty ridiculous. So I don't think that will happen. And I don't think that those teams are all that close just yet. And I think at the very least, they'll get in over Notre Dame, which is a huge thing. If you ask yourself, if Notre Dame runs the table, do they get in? I think a lot of people were telling you yes after they were 0-2. Well, then ask the same question for Miami, even if they don't make the ACC title game. I think that's easy money for me. I think they have to be in that case.
I think that the fact that they haven't even dropped out of the top 12 through the week after their first loss, which was never going to happen, they were going to drop 11 spots. But that just shows you that if they win out, there's just not a possibility of them being in that drop zone where 12, you get maybe overtaken by the group of 5 champion, or whatever the case is. I just don't see that as a possibility. If they're, especially when the college football rankings come out, if they go undefeated and they're anywhere 10 and up, they're not going to just drop out of the college football playoff with an undefeated schedule for the rest of the season. So I think the other interesting part of this is looking at we'd have to look at how the tiebreakers shake out. But if it was a 3-way tiebreaker between Virginia, Georgia Tech, and Miami, neither of those 3 teams play each other. So I don't have the tiebreakers in front of me, but I think that'd be interesting to see how that shakes out, because I don't know what teams would make it in that scenario. If it would definitely depend on where the loss was, and I think that'd be definitely part of the tie-breaking scenarios. But I think that's interesting to think about, because there's definitely a chance where maybe where all 3 of those teams don't lose exactly one game, or all 3 of those teams do only lose one game in the ACC conference, and that tie-breaking scenario comes into play.
Yeah, and as much as I'm relying on SMU, they have to lose as well, because their only 2 losses came to Big 12 teams, so they're undefeated in the conference as well. So they need to lose, but they also need to take care of business. And Miami is responsible for one of the losses.
Miami would. Yeah.
And the tiebreaker. So that's at least good. But if something crazy happens at Georgia Tech, and with all of that sort of stuff, if we see a Miami SMU rematch in the ACC title game, then maybe that is the most chaotic case of it all. All right, let's move into maybe what you liked or what you saw this weekend that you wanted to mention before we get out of here.
Yeah, I was actually going to pass the ball to you and let you go first on this one.
Well, the NBA's tipping off tonight, and we haven't even touched that yet. And Game 1 of the World Series, is that in a few days, or is that tomorrow? I don't know. Yeah, Monday. So that's in a week. Yeah. We're going to be touching on that a lot more, and talking about that. The NBA season isn't exactly the most interesting thing to me at the very start of it, but it's something that we'll definitely have to touch on. Oh, Friday. Yeah. Monday seemed like it was a little bit too far away. But yeah, I think both those things are interesting. The AP poll continues to amaze me, I think, with how many things that they get wrong. But the consensus usually saves them, because there's enough voters that have a good mind on any given topic to where it doesn't really actually affect the rankings. But USC should be ranked above Michigan. Well, USC should be ranked above Michigan. They just beat them the other week, 31-13. They lost a good game, decently close to Notre Dame. And there's just no situation where Michigan is not the safety net there. They have the same win-loss record, and they have a head-to-head game. Can we honor this, please? And it'll be fixed if it's not already in the AP poll over the next couple of weeks by the College Football Playoff Committee. But again, the AP poll continues to lose credibility, and hopefully it doesn't affect the way that people evaluate and look at teams.
Yeah, I completely agree. The head-to-head stuff is definitely interesting for the AP voting. It's just like the fact that USC can go up and beat Michigan one week and then lose a game, and then just be ranked right below them in the blink of an eye is absolutely absurd. But I found out what I wanted mine to be, and it's in the Miami Dolphins game. You know how like CBS has their game breaks where they go to different game and they show you what's going on across the league, right? Well, they panned the Miami Dolphins game, and I forget what the actual game was that they did this in, but they panned the Dolphins game. Tua throws an interception. It gets taken down to like the 2-yard line, first and goal. The Browns scored one play later on a Quinshon Judkins touchdown. And it was funny because they were showing the replay. Obviously, they show it like maybe like 5-6 minutes after it happens, anywhere like 5+ minutes after it happens, right? When they were showing the replay, the live shot of the Miami Dolphins game was Tua throwing another interception, and they were able to call both live. It was really funny. They went from a Tua interception that led to a touchdown a play later to them getting the ball back, and then 2 plays after that said touchdown from the Browns, them Tua Tagovailoa having another interception that they were able to break down on the game. I think that's funny. This team is doomed, and I think that was a perfect encapsulation of what the season's been like.
All right. Well, we've been here for almost an hour now. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure that you subscribe to the channel. This has been the Big Little Podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Previty. That is Andrew Greig, and we'll see you guys next time.